from the written text, not because they heard it sitting in the theater. Let us bear that in mind when we go into the theater of public issues, because right away we know two things. There's a good guy or gal, and there's a bad guy or gal. Generally, there is somewhere the medieval fair maiden that is being attacked by some dragon, and the knight in shining armor is going to come along and save the fair maiden. Now that may sound very simplistic to you, but if you are involved in a public crisis, I suggest that you just step back for a minute and say, who are the white hats? Who are the black hats? Where's the dragon? Where's the fair maiden? Is there a knight in shining armor? And see what you can do to avoid being the dragon and become the knight in shining armor. Now that may not sound very profound to you. I could give you a 3-hour lecture from Stanislavski and all that stuff, but I figure it's getting close to lunch. The fact is, it's one of the most profound things that our profession has discovered in about 100 years of practice. That when you are dealing in the public, you are in the theater. And in the theater, things are totally different than we think they are. But again, some of you may be trial lawyers, and you may not even have needed me to tell you that. The second point that you have to remember is that when you step into an issue, the item of rumor now becomes absolutely uncontrollable. Everybody has heard something that they're going to pass along. It's particularly true inside your bar associations. Those of you who've been officers for a while have gotten those calls when something is happening. Is it true that? Or Joe told me. Here again, the rules of rumor are very simple. Until you know that this is a widespread rumor, don't respond. When you do respond, realize that rumor is one of the hardest of all types of subject matter to deal with, and there's only one way I know to deal with rumors, and that is to blanket them. Now, how do you blanket a rumor? Let me give you an example. Let me use the example I gave you before of our friendly bakery. The rumor in this case said that the bakery was in fact secretly controlled by another group. Totally inaccurate, as many rumors are. The bakery responded by saying that isn't so. And the results were overwhelmingly counterproductive because it only fueled the fire that it might be so. The way to blanket a rumor in this case would have been to have had some kind of announcement, ceremony, stock transfer, something which would not have talked about the rumor at all, but which would have definitely shown that somebody else owned the bakery. Now in this case, this bakery is owned by a conglomerate. It seems to me relatively simple to set up some kind of a situation where the conglomerate is very public about doing something with their stock which shows that they own the bakery. Let me give you a similar example which may be more instructive. A restaurant in one of the larger cities found about 20 years ago a lot of rumors going around that the restaurant was unclean. There was no truth to this at all. They had always passed the health department inspections, but it got to the point where it was really threatening the business of this restaurant. It happened to be a restaurant chain. And what the restaurant chain did was to confer with city officials and got them concerned about the issue. And the city officials simply started a campaign of giving publicly and well-publicized awards to those restaurants which had met the health and safety standards for a period of 20 years. In this case, the restaurant had been around for a long time, had met them for those years, and the way the rumor was very quickly canceled was that the mayor, in front of the cameras, and the reporters simply gave this restaurant their certificate for cleanliness. They blanketed the rumor, never mentioned the rumor at all, but quickly showed that it simply had no substance and was a rumor. The third point that may be of interest to you is the question of response. Now this is tied to the other two, but has some little nuances that we may talk about. If it gets to the point where you're in the theater of crisis, public relations crisis, and you've got rumors and other things floating around, and you've got charges and countercharges from the media perhaps, from citizens, from folks who may be taking the other side, every day, or with great regularity, you're going to be faced with the question of response. Should we respond? The general rules for response are two. One of them I've already touched on, and that is don't respond unless you're pretty sure everybody has already heard the accusation or the other point of view. Otherwise, you risk giving publicity to the other point of view. When that situation exists and you must respond, be absolutely sure that the first and opening sentence of what you say carries with it the meaning, not the facts, but the meaning of your answer. You've read responses, as we all have, that are long screeds on the topic. And way down in paragraph 13 is the guts of the matter. And they usually start out saying, in the recent accusation of Joe Blow, which Joe loves because you've just put his accusation first. I'm suggesting to you that is not the way to go, but that the way you must respond is to start off with a strong statement of what it is you want to convey, preferably in one sentence. One of the reasons for this, of course, is that that's eminently televisable. It's something the radio stations can use without having to pick it out further down. But it's important even if we were having a debate in an audience like this, if there were another person here and that person and I were debating, if I can get my point out there, zingo, and then fill in the details, I win on every count. Now, I've had some interesting arguments on this with some of my lawyer friends who claim that you come zinging out with an unproven statement like that and that this is not right, this is irresponsible. But bear in mind what happens when you do that. First of all, those who tend to agree with you sit in the back saying, right on, brother, give it to them, that's the thing to do. And those who disagree with you immediately pay attention because they say, well, they don't like that, that's not true, that's an assertion, that's not proven. What does that mean? That means they're listening while you then in the following sentences go through your proof. Now those of you who practice regularly in front of juries, probably this is all old hat to you, which only proves my original premise that the court of law and the court of public opinion may not be too much different. One question that I've had asked a number of times by bar associations and others is why should we get involved in this public arena at all? Why should we not just do things within our own organization and forget all those other people out there? Well, let me share with you a little story about the most famous man from my hometown of Epping, New Hampshire. Back in the Revolutionary days, we had a governor in the town of Epping, a man by the name of William Plummer. If someone here is a real history buff, you may know that William Plummer was the only member of the presidential electors who voted in favor of John Quincy Adams and against Monroe in the so-called era of good feeling. History books like to say that he did this for some noble motive of saying that no one but the great Washington should be elected unanimously. As usual, the facts are wrong. He liked Adams and he hated Monroe, so being a good Yankee, he voted for Adams. He was not going to be swayed by the opinions of others, but he had a great understanding of the way our government operates. And this is a statement that he issued in one of those pseudonymous political columns that they used to write in the early days of our century when I guess they were either more or less sensitive to libel law than we are today, so they always signed it something else. Plummer signed his Cincinnatus, and what he wrote was that in a republic based upon public opinion, and that, by the way, is only the first use of the phrase public opinion in American history that anyone's been able to find, in a republic based upon public opinion, it is necessary to excite a spirit of inquiry to furnish public men with information of their errors. Sounds like a pretty good political diatribe, doesn't it? I've thought of using it myself many times, but I think it makes the point. The bar, because of the position that society has given you, certainly qualifies as public men and women. And anyone that is public is going to be operating according to public opinion, and therefore in the court of public opinion. Now, in this court, there are some other things that maybe we should just touch on because it may make some of the points that I really want to get across here today. Let's assume that you are doing some things that are not really crisis situations, but that the media decides it is going to investigate anyway. In other words, you want to keep it as a quiet issue, but the media would really like to blow it up and treat it as a public issue. What do you do in a case like that? Well, first of all, if you haven't all seen Fran's little publication on how to deal with the press, and if you don't keep that in your desk somewhere, I would strongly suggest that you do. It's an excellent publication, and I think it makes most of the good points. If the media wants to look into something that you feel is an inside matter, what are your options? I guess your options, one, are to tell them to go away. The second is to half-heartedly cooperate with them. And the third is to figure, well, they're the media, they have their rights, and we're going to open ourselves to them and let them really get into this issue. How you choose those options is not easy. In fact, sometimes it's impossible. So therefore, you have to have some rules of thumb. The rules of thumb that we have found in professional public relations practice are that, first of all, not commenting, not cooperating is no option at all. You can just strike that one right off. If the media wants to make something their business, they're going to do it, and they probably have a right to do it. You can argue that one philosophically, but I'm afraid we have a tough time arguing it from your legal point of view. So that's not an option at all. The question then becomes, do we really cooperate with the media and open ourselves up to them? Or, in fact, do we just sort of half-heartedly seem to cooperate, but we're not really going to share the information with them? I have found, as a standard rule of practice, that if the media, through some means or another, has in fact discovered what they think is an issue, that the only way to deal with it is to open yourself entirely to it, to cooperate with them so thoroughly, to show them so much information, so many ramifications, to let them have so many opinions on the subject, that two things will happen. One, very often they will realize that it is not really a public issue. It is not a story for them. And the reason for that is that a lot of the things that on first blush, the meaning of which seems to be very potent, if you let them dig into it and get back to that factual matter, they'll discover that it isn't really that potent. And remember, they only want good, sexy things that sell the medium. They're not going to bore the public with lectures or historical pieces. Secondly, if on getting into the material they feel it is worthy of coverage, if you've really given them all the material, your chances of getting a good, fair piece of coverage out of it by whatever medium are enhanced by at least a factor of 10. The reason for that is that you've merely followed the good debater's principle of telling them your viewpoint and the other's viewpoint so that you then become the great source of all information on the issue. I think that's a rule that you can follow with some confidence, and it's one that is clearly spelled out in Fran's booklet. Let me sum up this question of crisis, because I don't want to talk only about that aspect of public relations. It's really negative, this issue of crises, And I would like to spend a little of our time together talking about some more positive things that you as bar officials can do in this court of public opinion. But I do want to emphasize again the point that most crises are self-inflicted by the organization. We overreact to one or a few comments, and we go public with something that the public is simply not ready for and probably not interested in, and we therefore make the crisis. The interesting thing about law and public relations in recent times, of course, is the number of law firms that are hiring public relations counsel. I don't know if any of you here happen to be members of firms that have done that, but a newsletter that I publish for the field has been running a pretty regular series of articles for 5 years now describing the retention of my profession by yours. The number of things that we're doing for law firms are interesting. Marketing, a good deal of marketing, a good deal of work on internal decision making and consensus methods of arriving at conclusions, a good deal of work on planning, on how the human element comes into planning. Of course, a lot of dealing with the media or with publications. But it's an interesting area, and one which I think illustrates my point that lawyers do operate in the court of public opinion, and this is being quickly recognized. If, however, the Bar Association is to ultimately serve its members, then somebody has to go into that court of public opinion representing the bar as a whole, and of course you are elected. I'd like to talk then about some positive things you might do besides responding to crisis that would help the public to have a sense of what we like to call public consent for your activities. Some of these you're already doing, but there are many others which you may not be doing. The first thing that I believe the bar associations can probably agree on, and isn't that, now there's a daring statement, isn't it? But one thing I believe bar associations can agree